Picture this. The lone wolf stands at the edge of a cliff, not because he's contemplating jumping, but because he's drawn to the darkness that mirrors what's growing inside him. Every strength he's cultivated, every fortress of independence he's built, every stoic principle he's mastered, all of it can become a weapon turned inward when the pressure becomes unbearable. The very traits that make him formidable can twist into something unrecognizable, something dangerous. What happens when the Sigma male's greatest assets become his most destructive liabilities? Welcome to Sigma Male Community, where we don't just celebrate the strength of the independent man, we examine the shadows that even the strongest must face. Today we're diving deep into the uncomfortable truth that every Sigma needs to hear. Your greatest strengths, when pushed to their breaking point, can become your darkest turn. This isn't about weakness, it's about understanding the full spectrum of what it means to walk the path of the lone wolf. The ancient Stoics understood that true wisdom comes from knowing not just your virtues, but the vices they can become when taken to extremes. Marcus Aurelius himself warned that our strengths, unchecked by wisdom and self-awareness, can become the very chains that bind us to our own destruction. 1. The Obsessive Gambit. Imagine pouring every ounce of energy into a single goal, project, or person like a laser burning through steel. But this isn't the focused dedication that builds empires. This is something far more dangerous, a desperate coping mechanism disguised as determination. When the Sigma feels overwhelmed by the chaos of existence, he doesn't just focus. He hyperfocuses with an intensity that would make a monk's meditation look casual. The world shrinks to a single point of obsession, and everything else, relationships, health, balance, even basic human needs, gets sacrificed on the altar of this singular pursuit. It feels like ultimate control, the purest expression of will, but it's actually a fortress built so high that even the architect gets lost inside its walls. The ancient Stoics spoke of the discipline of desire, the ability to want what we have rather than desperately chase what we lack. But the obsessive gambit is the complete corruption of this principle. It's desire weaponized against the self. The Sigma convinces himself that this tunnel vision is strength, that this relentless pursuit is what separates him from the weak-willed masses. But watch closely and you'll see the destruction. Friendships crumble under neglect, the body breaks down from ignored warning signs, and the mind becomes a prison where only one thought is allowed to exist. This intensity can achieve remarkable things, fortunes built, mountains moved, impossible goals reached. Yet it consumes everything else in its path like a wildfire that doesn't know when to stop burning. 2. The logic bender. Picture reality as clay in the hands of a desperate sculptor, ruthlessly reshaped to fit a preconceived masterpiece that exists only in his mind. When a Sigma feels cornered or under extreme stress, that razor-sharp intellect that usually cuts through confusion becomes a weapon against truth itself. Facts get twisted, evidence gets dismissed, and reason becomes a servant to self-preservation rather than wisdom. This isn't conscious deception, it's something far more insidious. A complete restructuring of reality where their distorted view becomes absolute, unquestionable truth in their own mind. The Stoic principle of seeing things as they truly are gets corrupted into seeing things as they need to be for survival. Like a navigator using a broken compass while insisting the route is perfect, the Sigma in this state becomes lost in his own brilliance. He'll construct elaborate logical frameworks to justify actions that would normally appall him, create sophisticated arguments for positions that serve only his immediate emotional needs, and dismiss contradictory evidence with the same intellectual rigor he once used to seek truth. This isn't stupidity, it's intelligence turned against itself, the mind's incredible capacity for reasoning hijacked by the desperate need to avoid facing uncomfortable realities. The most dangerous part isn't that he's wrong, it's that he's so brilliant at being wrong that he can convince himself, and often others, that his distorted view is the only rational perspective. 3. The silent fortress. The Sigma's natural inclination toward privacy, that healthy boundary that protects his energy and autonomy, transforms into something far more sinister, an impenetrable citadel where no light can enter and no voice can be heard. Emotional drawbridges don't just get raised, they get welded shut. The moats around his inner world get filled not with water, but with an arctic silence that freezes anyone who tries to cross. This goes beyond the typical Sigma preference for solitude. This is active, deliberate withdrawal where thoughts and feelings get locked in vaults so deep that even he loses the combination. Watch what happens to the people who care about him. They find themselves banging on invisible walls, screaming into a void that swallows their words without echo. The Stoics taught that we are social beings, that our virtue is best expressed in relation to others, but the silent fortress perverts this into a form of emotional exile that punishes everyone involved. What begins as a reasonable defense mechanism, protecting oneself from overwhelming input or emotional chaos, evolves into a prison where the Sigma becomes both the warden and the prisoner. Loved ones exhaust themselves trying to reach him, relationships strain to the breaking point, and he watches it all happen from behind walls of his own construction, telling himself that this isolation is strength, that this silence is wisdom, when really it's just fear dressed up in the clothes of independence. 4. The rigid commander. Flexibility, that crucial virtue that allows the wise man to bend without breaking, simply evaporates. The Sigma's natural decisiveness hardens into something brittle and unforgiving. Adaptability, once a hallmark of his intelligence, shatters like glass under pressure. When stress mounts or circumstances become chaotic, he transforms into a captain who would rather sink with his ship than admit that icebergs require course corrections. The world narrows to a single, inflexible path, and any suggestion of deviation becomes not just unwelcome but seen as a personal attack on his competence. The ancient Stoics understood that wisdom lies in distinguishing between what we can control and what we cannot, but the rigid commander deludes himself into believing he can control everything through sheer force of will and unwavering determination. Alternative ideas aren't just dismissed, they're treated as evidence of weakness in those who suggest them. Compromise becomes impossible because it's seen as surrender rather than strategy. This tunnel vision breeds conflict wherever he goes, miscommunication becomes the norm, and his unwavering certainty feels like stubborn arrogance to everyone else. Its independence curdled into dogma, self-reliance transformed into a refusal to acknowledge that even the strongest tree breaks if it cannot bend with the storm. The need for control manifests as a complete inability to adapt, and ironically, this rigid pursuit of control leads to a loss of influence, respect, and ultimately, the very autonomy he was trying to protect. 5. The emotional sniper. In this dark turn, the Sigma's keen perception becomes a weapon aimed at anyone who dares to show genuine emotion. Open displays of vulnerability or authentic enthusiasm become targets in his crosshairs. His natural ability to read people, once used for understanding and strategic advantage, gets perverted into a hunting mechanism that seeks out emotional expression like a sniper seeking exposed targets. The person laughing too loudly, the colleague who tears up during a meaningful conversation, the friend who gets excited about simple pleasures, they all become marks of weakness in his distorted view. This isn't just judgment, it's a systematic devaluation of human connection disguised as superior insight. The Stoics valued emotional regulation, but they never advocated for emotional death or the mocking of others' humanity. Yet the Sigma in this state convinces himself that his emotional numbness is enlightenment, that his discomfort with others' expressiveness is evidence of his superior depth and maturity. He judges swiftly and often unfairly, seeing emotional transparency as a character flaw rather than the foundation of human connection. Each snap judgment erects another barrier between him and the world, another wall in his growing fortress of isolation. It's a defense mechanism born of his own discomfort with feeling, a projection of his internal struggle onto anyone brave enough to be authentically human in his presence. The tragic irony is that in trying to protect himself from the messiness of emotion, he cuts himself off from the very connections that could help him navigate his own darkness. Look at your screen right now. Whether you resonate deeply as a Sigma or you're trying to understand one navigating this darkness, recognize this crucial truth. These traits aren't destiny carved in stone. They're survival modes kicking in when the pressure feels unbearable, when the foundations of identity feel threatened. The key isn't condemnation or judgment. It's seeing the pattern clearly enough to break it before it breaks you. 6. The reckless abandon. The Sigma's usual calculated caution, that measured approach to risk that typically serves him so well, gets thrown aside like a restraint he can no longer tolerate. When feeling trapped or overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his control, he might suddenly leap into the void with a recklessness that would shock anyone who knows his normally careful nature. This isn't the calculated daring of a strategic risk-taker. This is something far more dangerous. A desperate bid for any sensation of control, a chaotic scream against perceived powerlessness that manifests as self-destructive choices disguised as bold moves. Watch him throw money at risky investments without research, engage in dangerous physical stunts that serve no purpose beyond the adrenaline rush, or make impulsive life changes that destroy years of careful building. The Stoics taught us that true freedom comes from accepting what we cannot control while focusing our energy on what we can, but the reckless abandon phase represents a complete inversion of this wisdom. Instead of finding peace in acceptance, he creates chaos in pursuit of the illusion that he's still the master of his fate. The temporary thrill of these dangerous choices masks a deeper turmoil, often creating far worse problems than the ones he was trying to escape. It's a desperate attempt to feel powerful in the face of helplessness, to reclaim agency through actions that actually surrender his long-term well-being to short-term impulses. The man who usually thinks 3 moves ahead suddenly can't see past the next risky decision, and each reckless choice makes the next one easier to justify. 7. The Puppeteer's Shadow. Here we witness perhaps the most disturbing corruption of the Sigma's natural gifts. His keen understanding of human nature and his strategic thinking ability get twisted into tools of manipulation. This isn't the overt domination of a tyrant. It's far more sophisticated and therefore more dangerous. The Sigma in this phase becomes a puppeteer working from the shadows, leveraging his insights into people's motivations, fears, and desires to orchestrate outcomes while allowing his targets to believe they're making autonomous choices. He crafts scenarios with the precision of a chess master, positioning people and circumstances so that the decisions they make, decisions that feel completely voluntary to them, serve his hidden agenda. The most chilling aspect is how natural it feels to him, how easily his strategic mind adapts to this darker purpose when he feels cornered or betrayed. The Stoic virtue of understanding human nature gets perverted into exploiting it, and his natural preference for working behind the scenes becomes a cover for ethical compromises he would normally find repugnant. Unlike crude manipulation that leaves obvious fingerprints, his approach is so subtle that victims often don't realize they've been guided until they're already entangled in consequences they never saw coming. This represents a complete betrayal of his core integrity, surfacing only when he feels deeply cornered or betrayed himself. Its independence corrupted into a need to control others rather than simply controlling himself, a dark perversion of autonomy that seeks to strip others of the very freedom he values most. 8. The Ice-Cold Decider. In this state, emotions aren't just regulated or controlled. They're deliberately excised from the decision-making process like a surgeon removing what he considers diseased tissue. When faced with difficult choices, especially during periods of internal turmoil, the Sigma defaults to a purely analytical approach that would make a computer seem warm by comparison. Empathy, compassion, and consideration for human cost become variables to be minimized or eliminated entirely. Every decision gets filtered through a ruthlessly logical framework that prioritizes efficiency and outcome over the messy complications of human feeling. The ancient Stoics valued reason over emotion, but they never advocated for the complete death of human compassion or the treatment of people as mere objects in a strategic game. Yet the Sigma in this phase convinces himself that his emotional numbness is enlightened rationality, that his ability to make decisions without being clouded by feelings is evidence of superior wisdom. He cuts through complex human situations with surgical precision, making choices that might be logically sound but leave emotional devastation in their wake. Relationships end with clinical efficiency, business decisions get made without regard for their impact on people's lives, and personal choices prioritize cold optimization over human values. It's not heartlessness in the traditional sense, it's a defensive scorched earth policy applied to his own capacity for feeling and extended to everyone around him. The fallout from these ice-cold decisions often creates more problems than they solve, but he rationalizes the collateral damage as the necessary cost of clear thinking, never recognizing that true wisdom requires both mind and heart working in harmony. 9. The Meticulous Prison Warden. The Sigma's natural talent for planning and organization, typically one of his greatest strengths, morphs into something suffocating and ultimately self-destructive. What begins as reasonable preparation and forethought transforms into an obsessive need to control every variable, predict every outcome, and schedule every moment with military precision. Spontaneity doesn't just diminish, it dies completely, strangled by an increasingly rigid framework that treats any deviation from the plan as a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. Life becomes a meticulously managed operation where joy in the unexpected vanishes, where serendipity is seen as a threat rather than a gift, and where relationships strain under the weight of inflexible expectations. The Stoics taught us to prepare for what we can while accepting what we cannot control, but the meticulous prison warden represents a complete corruption of this wisdom. Instead of preparing wisely while remaining flexible, he attempts to control everything through sheer force of planning and organization. Every conversation gets scripted in his mind, every social interaction gets analyzed for optimal outcomes, and every day gets parceled out into predetermined segments that leave no room for the beautiful chaos of authentic living. This obsessive control is a frantic attempt to impose order on internal or external chaos, but it ends up sacrificing life's vibrancy for the hollow illusion of security. The prison he builds is so comfortable, so perfectly organized, that he might not even realize he's trapped until someone points out that he hasn't experienced genuine surprise or spontaneous joy in years. 10. The Arctic silence, the silent treatment. This goes far beyond the Sigma's natural tendency toward measured communication or his preference for listening over talking. Communication doesn't just lessen, it freezes solid, becoming a deliberate weapon wielded with surgical precision against anyone perceived as the source of his pain or frustration. This is silence as warfare, a prolonged and punishing withdrawal that turns his natural introversion into an instrument of emotional torture that would make medieval interrogators take notes. The Arctic silence isn't mere quiet contemplation or healthy boundary setting, it's complete emotional exile designed to inflict maximum psychological damage while maintaining plausible deniability. He becomes an impenetrable wall of non-engagement, expressing profound hurt and disillusionment without uttering a single word, leaving his targets confused, frustrated, and completely powerless to bridge the gap he's created. The Stoics valued thoughtful speech and the power of silence, but they never intended for communication to become a tool of punishment or manipulation. Yet the Sigma in this state wields silence like a blade, cutting off all connection while maintaining the moral high ground of not saying anything cruel. The most devastating aspect is how completely it shuts down any possibility of resolution or understanding. Grudges that might normally fade with time and perspective instead calcify in this deep freeze, becoming permanent fixtures in relationships that could have been healed with honest communication. It's control through withdrawal, power exercised through absence, and it often succeeds in its immediate goal of making others feel the pain he's experiencing, but at the cost of destroying connections that might have provided genuine healing. 11. The pattern recognition trap, the unseen 11th. This is the meta trait that encompasses all the others. The tendency to fall into predictable cycles of these shadow behaviors whenever specific triggers appear. The Sigma's natural gift for pattern recognition, typically used to navigate complex situations and understand hidden dynamics, becomes a trap when applied to his own destructive tendencies. He might intellectually recognize when he's sliding into the obsessive gambit, or when the logic bender is emerging, but knowledge alone isn't enough to break patterns that have become deeply ingrained responses to stress and perceived threats. The dark turn isn't defined by any single trait but by the repeated, unchecked slide into these destructive patterns when pressure mounts beyond his normal coping mechanisms. What makes this particularly insidious is that his analytical mind can recognize the patterns without being able to interrupt them. He becomes a spectator to his own psychological drama, watching himself make choices he knows are destructive while feeling powerless to choose differently. The Stoics understood that awareness is the first step toward wisdom, but they also knew that awareness without action is just sophisticated self-torture. The pattern recognition trap represents the gap between knowing what's happening and being able to do something about it. However, this same analytical ability that can become a trap is also the key to freedom. The moment he truly sees the cycle as a cycle rather than isolated incidents, the moment he recognizes that these aren't character flaws but learned responses to overwhelming stress, that's when he gains the power to interrupt the pattern before it fully consumes the light. Awareness of the cycle is the first and most vital tool for breaking free from the gravitational pull of these shadow traits before they define who he becomes. Brothers, we've walked through the shadows together today, not to judge or condemn, but to illuminate the darker corridors of the Sigma mind that most content creators are too afraid or too shallow to explore. This isn't about labeling anyone as toxic or broken. It's a stark, unflinching exploration of the survival mechanisms that emerge when the lone wolf feels fatally wounded, when the pressures of existence push even the strongest beyond their breaking point. Every trait we've examined today represents a strength corrupted by desperation, a virtue twisted by circumstances into something unrecognizable and ultimately self-destructive. The ancient Stoics knew something that modern society has forgotten. True strength isn't found in never falling into darkness, but in having the courage to recognize when you're there and the wisdom to find your way back to the light. Marcus Aurelius, even as an emperor with unlimited power, wrote extensively about his own struggles with these very human tendencies toward corruption and self-deception. Epictetus, who knew the depths of powerlessness as a slave, understood that our greatest battles are fought not in the world but within ourselves. Seneca, despite his wealth and influence, grappled with the same shadow traits we've explored today. What made them great wasn't their immunity to darkness. It was their relentless commitment to self-examination and growth. Recognizing these shadows in yourself or in another Sigma isn't a sign of failure. It's the essential first step back toward authentic strength and wisdom. These patterns aren't destiny written in stone. They're signposts demanding a different path, wake-up calls that arrive disguised as personal crises. The man who can look honestly at his own capacity for destruction, who can see his strengths clearly enough to recognize when they're becoming weaknesses, that man has taken the first and most crucial step toward mastery of himself. If this exploration has resonated with you, if you've seen yourself or someone you care about in these shadow traits, then you understand why Sigma male community exists. We're not here to feed you comfortable lies about male superiority or simple formulas for success. We're here to explore the full spectrum of what it means to walk the path of independence and strength, including the dangers that lurk along the way. We're building a community of men committed to real growth, honest self-examination, and the kind of authentic development that can only come from facing our shadows as fearlessly as we pursue our goals. Darkness isn't destiny, brothers, it's information. It's your psyche's way of telling you that something needs attention, that some strength has been pushed beyond its healthy limits, that some wound needs healing rather than ignoring. Choose awareness over denial, growth over stagnation, and the difficult path of real development over the comfortable illusion of perfection. The lone wolf who knows his own shadows is infinitely more powerful than the one who pretends they don't exist. Hit that like button if this deep dive into the Sigma shadow has given you insights worth keeping. Comment below with your own experiences or observations about these patterns. Your perspective might be exactly what another brother needs to hear. Share this with any Sigma in your life who might benefit from this level of honest exploration, and if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that notification bell because Sigma Male Community is committed to bringing you the kind of content that actually matters, the kind of wisdom that can transform not just your mindset but your entire approach to living as an independent, thinking man. This is where real growth happens, where comfortable assumptions get challenged, and where the journey toward authentic strength continues. Until next time, stay aware, stay growing, and remember, your shadows don't define you unless you let them.